The first sign wasn't the meeting invite, it was the subject line: Cloud Cost Optimization. At Zentrix, that had always been code for one thing: someone was about to be put on the chopping block. I saw it before I even stepped into the conference room and knew exactly who the target was. 2 weeks later, I left quietly, without a word of goodbye. But the warning system I left behind continued to run silently. 6 months later, the AWS bill hit $600,000 per month, and the company sent another email, this time not to fire, but to beg for help. My name is Rebecca Allen. I've spent the last decade building reliable infrastructure that nobody notices until it breaks. That's the curse of DevOps. When you do your job perfectly, everyone thinks you do nothing at all. I've been at Zentrix Systems for 6 years, single-handedly architecting their entire cloud infrastructure, while the rest of the engineering team got to play with shiny new frameworks and launch features that made the executives smile. Zentrix wasn't always a bloated corporate machine. When I joined, we were 30 people in a converted warehouse in Denver, running a promising fintech SaaS platform that helped small businesses manage cash flow. I was employee number 27, and the only one who knew how to set up proper cloud architecture. Back then, my unofficial title was the Infrastructure Department. Now we're 400 employees strong, with fancy downtown offices, 3 layers of middle management, and apparently, a new CTO who thinks I'm obsolete. I knew something was wrong the moment Logan Pierce strutted into the office 3 months ago with his Allbirds sneakers and Silicon Valley swagger. He'd come from some overvalued startup that specialized in blockchain solutions for problems that didn't exist. His LinkedIn profile had more buzzwords than actual accomplishments. But the board was impressed by his vision for next-generation cloud architecture and frictionless scalability paradigms. What Logan lacked in practical experience, he made up for in confidence. Within a week, he was pontificating about our legacy infrastructure in executive meetings. Within a month, he'd hired a team of consultants to audit our systems. The fact that our platform had 99.9998% uptime and cost less than a third of industry averages to run apparently didn't matter. It wasn't sexy enough. Not enough microservices. Not enough serverless functions. Not enough Kubernetes clusters that nobody knew how to maintain. I first met Logan during what he called a technical alignment meeting. He spent 45 minutes explaining to me, the person who had built our entire infrastructure, why monoliths were dead and how serverless was the only viable approach for modern businesses. The future is ephemeral compute and managed services, he declared, drawing meaningless architecture diagrams on the whiteboard. We need to break down these monolithic structures into discrete, loosely coupled microservices that can scale independently. I nodded politely while mentally calculating how much his proposed architecture would cost. The answer? About 4 times our current cloud spend, with twice the points of failure. What about our cost controls? I asked. The reserve instances and spot fleet management systems we've built save us nearly 70% on compute. Logan waved dismissively. Modern architectures optimize for developer velocity, not penny pinching. We can't innovate if we're constrained by legacy thinking about costs. That's when I should have updated my resume. Anyone who thinks cloud costs don't matter is someone who's never had to explain a surprise 6-figure AWS bill to a CFO. But I'd built something at Zentrix that I was proud of, an elegant, efficient system that just worked. I wasn't ready to abandon it. For the next 2 months, I watched as Logan systematically undermined my authority. He brought in a cloud modernization specialist named Dax Monroe, who charged $300 an hour to recommend architecture patterns he'd copied from Medium articles. Logan created a new cloud platform team that reported directly to him, staffed with junior engineers who were excited about using the newest AWS services but had no idea how to monitor them properly. I tried to sound the alarm. I wrote detailed analyses of the projected cost implications. I created dashboards showing our current performance metrics. I even built a prototype of how we could incrementally modernize our infrastructure without risking stability. But in the new Zentrix, data didn't matter as much as narrative, and the narrative was that I was a relic standing in the way of progress. So when the calendar invite arrived with cloud cost optimization in the subject line, I knew what was coming. It was scheduled for 4:30 p.m. on a Friday, the classic firing time. The attendees were me, Logan, and someone from HR I'd never met. I spent the day documenting critical systems, writing down passwords that only existed in my head, and copying instructions for disaster recovery scenarios onto a USB drive. Not because I was obligated to, but because I still cared about the platform I'd built. The meeting was mercifully brief. Logan spoke in the passive voice, as people do when they're firing someone but want to pretend it's not their decision. The company has decided to move in a new direction with our infrastructure strategy, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. We're implementing a more scalable, cloud-native approach that aligns with industry best practices. The HR person slid a document across the table. 2 weeks severance pay, a reminder about my confidentiality obligations, a form to sign acknowledging that I was returning all company property. We've determined that your role is no longer aligned with our technical roadmap. Logan continued, we appreciate your contributions, but we need specialists in modern cloud architecture to take us to the next level. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my work. I just asked one question. Who will handle the transition of institutional knowledge? Logan seemed surprised by the question. Dax and the new team will manage the infrastructure going forward. They've completed a thorough audit of our systems. No transition plan, no handover period. Not even a request for documentation. Either they were incredibly confident or incredibly foolish. I suspected the latter. I signed the paperwork, handed over my laptop and badge, and left the building for the last time. No goodbye party, no farewell lunch, not even a company-wide email announcing my departure. 6 years of building their critical infrastructure, and I was erased in an afternoon. On my desk, I left a single post-it note with one word written on it: simplify. It was both advice and warning, a message that would mean nothing to Logan but everything to anyone who truly understood complex systems. I didn't sabotage anything on my way out. I didn't plant time bombs or delete critical configs or change passwords. That would have been unprofessional and potentially harmful to the customers who relied on Zentrix's services. But I did make one small change. I disabled the cost alerting systems I'd built, the ones that would have warned them when their AWS bill started to climb. I also removed the auto-scaling limiters that prevented services from scaling beyond reasonable bounds. I didn't break anything. I just removed the safety rails. Sometimes the only way people learn to respect the cliff edge is by getting a little closer to it. The next 2 weeks were strange. After 6 years of constant Slack notifications and middle-of-the-night incident alerts, the silence of unemployment was deafening. I spent a lot of time walking around my Austin neighborhood, rediscovering what it felt like to be disconnected. I caught up on reading. I slept past 6 a.m. I contemplated a road trip. Not a single person from Zentrix reached out. Not the engineers I'd mentored. Not the product managers I'd helped. Not even the CEO who used to praise my work at all-hands meetings. It was as if I'd never existed. Corporate amnesia is a powerful force. I wasn't worried about finding another job. DevOps engineers with my experience don't stay unemployed for long, especially in Austin's tech scene. But I wasn't ready to jump into another role just yet. I needed time to process what had happened and decide what I wanted next. As it turned out, what happened next would come to me. It started with a text message from Charlie, one of the senior engineers at Zentrix, exactly 23 days after I left. Hey Rebecca, is this still your number? Seeing some weird behavior in prod? I was tempted to ignore it. Not my circus, not my monkeys anymore. But Charlie had always been one of the good ones. A solid engineer who appreciated the infrastructure work that made his job possible. Still me, I replied. But not my systems anymore. What's up? Just between us. Since you left, everything's been weird. Response times are all over the place. CPU utilization is spiking for no reason. And nobody knows how anything works. I wasn't surprised. What does Dax say? There was a long pause before Charlie's reply came through. Dax says it's expected behavior during the transition to a more dynamic architecture, whatever that means. I laughed out loud in my living room. Classic consultant speak, reframe problems as intentional features. Sorry to hear that, I wrote back. Hope it settles down soon. The AWS bill doubled last month, Charlie added. CFO is freaking out. That got my attention. Our monthly cloud spend had been stable at around $45,000 for the past year, a remarkably low figure for a company of our size and traffic. If it had doubled in 1 month, something was seriously wrong. Are the cost alerts not firing? I asked. What cost alerts? And there it was. They hadn't just replaced me. They'd dismantled all the systems I'd built to keep things running smoothly, including the cost monitoring tools. Never mind, I replied. Good luck with everything. I put my phone down and tried to let it go. Not my problem anymore. But that night, I dreamed of runaway autoscaling groups and unconstrained Lambda concurrency. In my dream, the AWS billing dashboard showed numbers climbing higher and higher while Logan and Dax stood in front of it, still drawing their useless architecture diagrams on a whiteboard. The next message came 2 weeks later, this time from Melissa, the CFO. We'd always had a good relationship. I was one of the few technical people who could explain cloud costs to her in terms that made sense. Rebecca, do you have time for a quick call? Nothing formal, just seeking some perspective. I agreed to a 15-minute phone call the next day. When she called, she sounded stressed. I'll get right to the point, she said after brief pleasantries. Our AWS bill for last month was $118,000. I need to understand if this is normal during a cloud architecture transition. It wasn't, not even close. That was nearly triple our previous spend. What did Logan tell you? I asked. That there are temporary cost increases expected during modernization, and that it will stabilize and ultimately decrease once the new architecture is fully implemented. But I need a second opinion from someone who isn't trying to justify their decisions to me. I chose my words carefully. In my experience, well-planned cloud migrations don't cause cost spikes of that magnitude. Typically, you run the old and new systems in parallel for a while, which might increase costs by 20 to 30% temporarily. Tripling your bill suggests something else is happening. Like what? Without seeing the actual usage patterns, I can only speculate. But common causes include misconfigured autoscaling, orphaned resources that nobody is tracking, or over-provisioned services. Melissa was silent for a moment. Logan said you were resistant to modern cloud approaches that might have temporary cost implications but long-term benefits. I bit back my initial response. Melissa, you've seen our financial reports for the past 3 years. Under my architecture, we scaled from 10,000 to 200,000 users while keeping our cloud costs nearly flat. I'm not opposed to modernization. I'm opposed to waste. That's what I thought, she said quietly. Look, I can't officially bring you in as a consultant. Logan would see it as undermining his authority. But if I sent you our recent AWS bill with a resource breakdown, would you be willing to take a look, just as a favor to an old colleague? I should have said no. I should have wished her luck and moved on. Instead, I said, send it over. The bill she forwarded was worse than I expected. Not only had the total amount tripled, but the distribution of costs made no sense. We were suddenly spending thousands on services we'd never used before. Lambda costs had increased by 200%. Data transfer costs were through the roof, and they were using on-demand pricing for everything, with no reserved instances or savings plans in place. I spent an hour writing up an analysis, highlighting the most concerning patterns and suggesting immediate actions they could take to reduce costs. I sent it to Melissa with a note. This is the last free consulting you'll get from me. Good luck. She replied with a simple, thank you, I understand. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next month, the messages kept coming. First from engineers asking cryptic questions about systems they were struggling to understand, then from the director of customer success, wondering if I knew why performance had become so erratic. Even the VP of product reached out, asking if I'd be willing to have a coffee next time I was near the Denver office. I deflected most of these inquiries. I wasn't interested in being Zentrix's unofficial support line, and I definitely wasn't going to undermine Logan's team, no matter how misguided I thought they were. But I did keep an eye on the company from a distance, watching their status page show increasingly frequent service degradation incidents. Meanwhile, I started interviewing for new positions. I had several promising leads, including a senior DevOps role at a stable, established company with reasonable expectations and good work-life balance. It was exactly the kind of job that would have appealed to me before Zentrix. But now, I found myself hesitating. Something didn't feel right. It was during a hike in the hill country outside Austin that I realized what I really wanted to do next. I'd been thinking about the patterns I'd seen at Zentrix and heard about from friends at other companies. The cycle was always the same. Experienced engineers would build solid, cost-effective infrastructure. New leadership would come in wanting to make their mark. Consultants would recommend flashy rewrites. Costs would explode. Stability would suffer. And customers would pay the price, both literally and figuratively. What if there was a service specifically designed to prevent this cycle? Not traditional cloud consulting, which often incentivized complexity and high bills, but something more focused. A service that helped companies understand their true cloud costs, identify waste, and build efficient systems without sacrificing reliability. By the time I got back to my car, I had the beginnings of a business plan. I'd call it Driftline, named after the concept in control systems where small, undetected changes eventually lead to catastrophic failures. Our tagline: stop the drift before the cliff. I spent the next 2 weeks building a simple website, defining service offerings, and setting up the legal structure for my new consulting business. I didn't do any marketing or outreach. I wanted to start small and build through word of mouth. I figured it might take months to get my first client. It took 3 days. The message came from Jason, the CTO of a mid-sized fintech startup I'd met at a conference the previous year. Heard you've gone independent. We need to talk about our AWS bill. It's gotten completely out of control and nobody can figure out why. Name your price. I named a price that was 3 times what I would have charged as an employee. Jason didn't even negotiate. We signed a contract the next day. What I found when I looked at their systems was sadly familiar. Well-intentioned engineers implementing complex architectures they'd read about on tech blogs, without understanding the cost implications or operational requirements. They'd adopted Kubernetes because everyone was doing it, but were running it in the most expensive way possible. They had microservices that spent more time communicating with each other than doing actual work. They were storing data in premium services when standard options would have been fine. Over 2 weeks, I helped them restructure their architecture, implement proper cost monitoring, and set up automated scaling policies that balance performance and expense. By the end of the engagement, I'd reduced their monthly cloud bill by 62% while actually improving system reliability. Jason was ecstatic. "This is the best money we've ever spent," he told me on our final call. "Do you mind if I refer you to some other CTOs I know?" I didn't mind at all. The referrals started coming in steadily. It seemed there was no shortage of companies suffering from what I now called cloud cost disease, the tendency for cloud bills to grow exponentially without delivering proportional value. Some clients needed full architecture reviews. Others just wanted help setting up proper monitoring and governance. I was selective about who I worked with, focusing on companies where I could make a significant impact. Meanwhile, I kept hearing rumors about Zentrix. Their last product release had been delayed 3 times. Customers were complaining about intermittent outages, and their cloud costs were still climbing. Charlie texted me again. "AWS bill hit $286,000 last month. Logan keeps saying it's temporary." I wasn't gloating about their problems. Despite everything, I still cared about the product I'd helped build and the people who depended on it. But I also recognized that this was a predictable outcome of the decisions Logan had made. 4 months after I left Zentrix, I was in the middle of helping a client migrate from AWS to a multi-cloud setup when I received an unexpected LinkedIn message from Dax Monroe, the cloud consultant Logan had hired. "Need to talk privately. Not about consulting work. Personal matter." Curious, I agreed to a phone call. When Dax called, he sounded nothing like the confident consultant I remembered. "I'm leaving Zentrix," he said without preamble, "and I think you should know what's been happening." According to Dax, the situation was even worse than I'd imagined. The new modern architecture was fundamentally flawed, with services that couldn't handle production loads and integrations that failed under stress. The team had been working nights and weekends trying to stabilize things, but every fix seemed to cause two new problems. "Logan won't admit it's not working," Dax said. "He keeps pushing us to add more services, more complexity. The engineers are trying to tell him that we need to step back and simplify, but he won't listen." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. There was a pause before Dax answered. "Because I saw your post-it note. Simplify." At first, I thought it was just a dig at us. But the deeper I got into your systems, the more I realized you were right. The architecture you built was elegant. It was simple where it needed to be and complex only where complexity was justified. We've spent months replacing it with something objectively worse. It was the validation I hadn't realized I needed. "So what now?" "I'm getting out," Dax said. "I've already told my consulting firm I want off this project, but I'm worried about what happens to Zentrix. Their biggest customer is launching a major integration next month, and I don't think the system will hold up." That biggest customer was Finovo, a rising star in the personal finance space. They use Zentrix's payment processing API as the backbone of their service. If that API failed during a major launch, it could be catastrophic for both companies. "Have you raised the alarm internally?" "I've tried," Dax sighed. "Logan dismisses it. The CEO doesn't want to hear bad news. And the engineers who understand how serious it is are too afraid for their jobs to speak up." After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, thinking about what to do with this information. I had no official connection to Zentrix anymore. Any attempt to reach out might be seen as interference or even sabotage. But I also couldn't just stand by and watch a potential disaster unfold. In the end, I decided to do nothing, at least not directly. But I did add Finovo to the list of companies I was keeping an eye on. The predicted disaster came right on schedule. On the day of Finovo's big launch, a new real-time payment feature that had been hyped for months, their entire service went down. Not just the new feature, but everything. Users couldn't log in, transactions failed, and account balances showed zero across the board. It was the kind of outage that makes national news when it happens to a financial service. The status updates from both Finovo and Zentrix told the story in real time. Finovo status, 9:03 a.m. We're investigating reports of users unable to access accounts. Zentrix status, 9:17 a.m. Investigating elevated error rates in payment processing API. Finovo status, 9:45 a.m. Confirmed service disruption affecting all users. Engineering teams are working on restoration. Zentrix status, 10:22 a.m. Identified issue with transaction processing services. Working on mitigation. The outage lasted 6 hours. 6 hours during which Finovo users couldn't access their money. 6 hours of frantic tweets, angry support tickets, and plummeting stock price. By the time services were restored, the damage was done. Finovo's carefully orchestrated launch had turned into a PR nightmare, and they were looking for someone to blame. They chose Zentrix. The next day, tech news sites were running the story. Finovo points to infrastructure partner for catastrophic service failure. Zentrix's stock dropped 18% in a single day. I watched it all unfold from a distance, feeling a complicated mix of vindication and sadness. This was exactly the kind of scenario I had worked so hard to prevent during my time at Zentrix. Our systems had been designed to fail gracefully, with multiple layers of redundancy and circuit breakers to prevent cascading failures. All of that had apparently been dismantled in the name of modernization. A week after the Finovo incident, I received the most surprising message yet. From Marcus Zhang, the CEO of Zentrix. "Rebecca, I hope this message finds you well. I wonder if you might be available for a confidential conversation about the future of Zentrix's infrastructure. Please let me know a convenient time." Marcus had been the one who approved Logan's hiring and, by extension, my firing. He had never questioned the technical roadmap that had led to my departure, and now he wanted to talk. I waited 24 hours before responding, partly to gather my thoughts and partly to make a point. I'm available tomorrow at 10 a.m. Central Time for a 30-minute call. The Marcus who appeared on my screen the next day looked nothing like the confident CEO I remembered. His eyes had dark circles under them, his normally perfect hair was disheveled, and he seemed to have aged years in months. "Thank you for taking my call," he began. "I'll get straight to the point. Zentrix is in trouble. Our infrastructure is unstable, our costs are out of control, and we're at risk of losing major customers. Logan Pierce is no longer with the company, and we need help rebuilding our cloud architecture." So Logan had been fired. I can't say I was surprised, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I might have expected. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said neutrally. "What exactly are you looking for from me?" Marcus took a deep breath. "We want to bring you back. As Chief Technology Officer with full authority over our technical direction, your compensation package would include significant equity and a base salary well above industry standards. The offer was unexpected. 6 months ago, it would have been everything I wanted. Now, it felt like too little. Too late. I appreciate the offer, Marcus, but I've started my own consulting firm. I'm working with multiple clients on exactly these kinds of problems, and I'm not looking to return to a full-time role right now." His face fell. "I understand. Would you consider a consulting arrangement then? We desperately need someone who understands our systems." "What's the current state of things?" I asked. Marcus didn't hold back. The AWS bill had reached $600,000 the previous month, more than 13 times what it had been under my architecture. System reliability had dropped to 96.5% uptime, well below industry standards. 3 major customers, including Finovo, had formally notified Zentrix that they were evaluating alternative providers, and the engineering team was demoralized, with key people leaving every week. "The board is asking hard questions about how we got here," Marcus admitted. "I don't have good answers for them." I thought about the teams at Zentrix, the engineers who were suffering through this crisis, the customer success people trying to apologize for outages they didn't cause, the sales team attempting to retain clients despite deteriorating service. They didn't deserve what was happening, even if the leadership did. "I can't come back as an employee," I said finally. "But Driftline could take on Zentrix as a client. My standard terms for a situation of this complexity would be $35,000 per week, with a minimum 12-week commitment, plus an additional fee for the emergency assessment." It was an astronomical rate, far more than Zentrix had ever paid for consulting services. But it was also far less than they were hemorrhaging each month in cloud costs alone. Marcus didn't even blink. "Send over the contract. We'll sign it today." "One more thing," I added. "I'll need complete authority over infrastructure decisions during the engagement. No committees, no consensus building. If I say a service needs to be rebuilt or replaced, it happens." "Agreed," Marcus said immediately. "When can you start?" "I'll clear my schedule and begin on Monday. I'll need admin access to all your AWS accounts and a direct line to whoever is currently managing your infrastructure." "That would be Terry Kim. He was on your team before the reorganization. He's been trying to keep things together. But he's in over his head." Poor Terry. He was a good engineer but had only been at Zentrix for a year before I left. He'd been thrown into an impossible situation. "Tell Terry I'll be in touch today," I said. "And Marcus, this is going to get worse before it gets better. The kind of technical debt you've accumulated doesn't get resolved overnight." "I understand. We're prepared for that." After Marcus hung up, I sat back in my chair and let out a long breath. I was going back to Zentrix, not as the overlooked infrastructure engineer, not as the fired DevOps lead, but as the external expert brought in to save them from themselves. It was a strange full circle. I spent the weekend preparing for what would undoubtedly be an intense project. I reviewed notes from my time at Zentrix, refreshed my memory on the specific AWS services we'd used, and sketched out an initial assessment plan. By Sunday night, I had a clear strategy for my first week back. Monday morning, I logged into the Zentrix AWS console for the first time in 6 months. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The elegant, efficient architecture I'd built had been replaced with a tangled mess of services. There were dozens of underutilized EC2 instances running 24/7. Lambda functions triggered other Lambda functions in circular patterns. Data was being copied between S3 buckets unnecessarily. Every service was over-provisioned, but still struggling under load. It was as if someone had taken a well-planned city and replaced it with a chaotic sprawl of poorly constructed buildings with no infrastructure to support them. I scheduled an emergency call with Terry and the remaining infrastructure team members. When Terry's face appeared on the screen, the relief in his expression was palpable. "Rebecca, thank God. We're drowning here." "I can see that," I said. "Let's start with the basics. What's causing the most immediate pain?" For the next 2 hours, Terry and his team walked me through the current state of the system. The picture that emerged was one of hasty implementation without proper planning. Logan and Dax had pushed for a complete rewrite of core services using a microservices architecture, but without establishing the necessary foundations first. They'd broken apart the monolith, but failed to solve the much harder problems of service discovery, consistent data access, and operational monitoring. "Every time we fix one issue, 3 more pop up," Terry explained. "It's like playing whack-a-mole with production incidents." "What about the cost increases?" I asked. "Is anyone monitoring resource utilization?" The team exchanged uncomfortable looks. Logan disabled most of the cost optimization tools, one of the engineers said. He said they were artificially constraining our ability to scale. I had to work to keep my expression neutral. "All right, here's what we're going to do. First, we need to stabilize the existing services without making any major architectural changes. Then we'll implement proper monitoring and cost controls. Only after that can we start thinking about the right long-term architecture." The team nodded, clearly relieved to have clear direction after months of chaos. "This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint," I warned them. "And we need to be transparent with the rest of the company about what's happening. No more pretending everything is fine when it isn't." The next few weeks were some of the most intense of my professional life. I worked 14-hour days alongside the Zentrix team, triaging critical issues, implementing emergency fixes, and gradually bringing stability back to the platform. We had to make difficult decisions, including temporarily reverting some services back to their original monolithic architecture while we built a proper foundation for microservices. The AWS bill for the first month of our engagement still came in at $542,000, not much lower than before I started. But by the second month, we'd cut it to $378,000. By the third month, we were down to $223,000. Still far higher than the $45,000 we'd been spending before, but trending in the right direction. More importantly, system stability improved dramatically. Uptime went from 96.5% to 99.2% and then to 99.8%. Error rates dropped. Response times became consistent. Customers stopped threatening to leave. Throughout this period, Marcus gave me exactly what he'd promised: complete authority over technical decisions. He never questioned my approach or pushed for faster results. He simply made sure I had whatever resources I needed and kept the board informed of our progress. As we approached the end of the initial 12-week engagement, Marcus asked for a meeting to discuss next steps. "The transformation you've led has been remarkable," he said. "The board is extremely pleased with the progress. We'd like to extend your contract for another 6 months, with the same terms." It was tempting. The work was challenging and rewarding, and the compensation was exceptional. But I had other clients waiting, and I'd started to appreciate the freedom of running my own business. "I can't commit to another 6 months of full-time work with Zentrix," I told him, "but I can offer an alternative. Driftline could provide ongoing advisory services, with me personally available for 10 hours per week." We'd also train your internal team on maintaining the architecture and cost controls we've implemented. Marcus looked disappointed, but nodded. If that's the best you can offer, we'll take it. You've become too valuable to lose completely. As we wrapped up the call, Marcus asked one final question. Looking back, what do you think was our biggest mistake? I considered this carefully. It wasn't hiring Logan, or even the decision to modernize your architecture. Those might have been reasonable choices with the right implementation. The biggest mistake was dismissing the value of what already worked. You had a system that was efficient, reliable, and cost-effective. Instead of building on that foundation, you tore it down completely and tried to replace it with something trendy but unproven. Marcus nodded slowly. An expensive lesson. Very expensive, I agreed. But hopefully one you won't repeat. In the months that followed, I divided my time between Zentrix and other clients facing similar challenges. Driftline grew from a one-person operation to a team of 5 specialists, each with deep expertise in cloud cost optimization and reliable architecture design. We developed a reputation for honesty and effectiveness. The consultants you called when other consultants had made things worse. I never publicly discussed what had happened at Zentrix. I didn't need to. The story spread through the tech community on its own, becoming something of a cautionary tale about the dangers of chasing architectural trends without understanding the fundamentals of good system design. Logan Pierce landed on his feet. Of course, people like Logan always do. The last I heard, he was working at another startup, talking about the transformative potential of AI-driven infrastructure. I wished them luck. They'd need it. As for me, I found an unexpected satisfaction in my new role. Driftline didn't just help companies reduce their cloud bills. We helped them build sustainable, sensible architectures that balanced innovation with pragmatism. We valued simplicity over complexity, reliability over novelty, and results over buzzwords. 1 year after my unceremonious departure from Zentrix, I received an email from their board of directors. They were creating a new technical advisory board to help guide the company's long-term technology strategy, and they wanted me to be its chairperson. I accepted the role, with one condition: that the first item on every agenda would be a review of cloud costs and system reliability metrics. Some lessons, I insisted, should never be forgotten. The tech industry is full of Logan Pierces, charismatic leaders who promise revolutionary changes without understanding the foundations they're building upon. But it also has its share of quiet engineers who keep systems running, costs manageable, and businesses alive. The former get the spotlight. The latter get the satisfaction of a job well done. I've made my peace with that dynamic. In fact, I've built a successful business around it. Because when the shiny new architecture fails and the bills pile up and the customers start leaving, who do they call? They call the people who know how to make things work.